This is Professor Michael Chapman. I'm one of the most experienced IVF doctors in Australia. I believe that an important part that I can contribute is to educate patients in relation to fertility, infertility, and all that involves. These series of podcasts help to educate you. I hope they are helpful to you. If you wish to know more, however, I'm more than happy to have you contact me via email, which is profmchapman@gmail.com, or make an appointment to see me on 9138 4222. Hi there. I'm Professor Michael Chapman. I'm an expert, I say, in the area of infertility. I've only been working in the area for 35 years. So I've seen IVF go from being an experiment with very low success rates to where it is today, which is highly successful and so much easier for both the patient and us as doctors, given the changes that have occurred in terms of medication and our laboratories, which have moved so much in that time frame. As a long-term carer for infertility patients, my experience lets me make decisions that perhaps others find difficult to make, or my capacity to sort out a problem when there are problems is above average, I would call it. Anyway, this FaceTime is part of the education program that I believe that is vital for patients going through their infertility journey. Hopefully it's helpful to you. We generally start with questions. So if you've got anybody that has joined us, if you've got any questions, please ask, and I will provide an opinion. And otherwise, we'll just get started with some questions from previous episodes.
Okay, Prof, the one question that was submitted was, what are your thoughts about more clinics adopting a freeze-all approach where all viable embryos are frozen and transferred in a later cycle? Frozen embryo transfers tend to have higher success rates.
Yeah, the last statement in that is probably not correct. So in relation to freeze-all, I know that there are clinics that have adopted that approach and seem to get good success rates. Now, in terms of a frozen embryo versus a fresh embryo, the evidence is pretty clear that if you get a frozen embryo of good quality, and you compare it to a fresh transfer with an embryo of good quality, the results are the same. I know that some people have said it's better, but the biggest randomized study suggests there was no difference either way. Do we do freeze-all at all? There is, in Australia at the moment, about, I think it was 18% of all cycles are freeze-all cycles. So it's happening quite commonly. There are specific reasons why you would do a freeze-all. When we're doing genetic testing of the embryos, because of the time it takes to do that genetic testing, we need to freeze the embryos. So that's one scenario. The second is that if we're measuring progesterone levels, there is reasonably good evidence that if you have high progesterone levels just on the day of trigger, above 5 or 6, people vary in their cutoff point, you're going to have a lower chance of success because the endometrium is already being exposed to progesterone and therefore won't be in synchrony when we put the embryo back, and therefore pregnancy rates are less. So it's better to freeze in that scenario. So there are situations where it's indicated. However, as the question asked, there are clinics that are doing it as a routine. Why would they do it as a routine? It certainly does no harm in terms of success rate. That embryo that's thawed and survives is going to give you as good a pregnancy rate as a fresh one. The downside slightly is that freezing and thawing process is not without the possibility, only 1 or 2%, maybe 2%, of actually losing what might have been a good embryo in the freezing and the thawing process. There is a slight downside from that regard. What it does do is enables everybody to be synchronized in terms of the embryo transfer itself. Most of the clinics that do freeze-all cycles as a routine also do hormone replacement cycles, which means that the embryo transfer is always done during weekdays when the scientists are around, and as are the doctors. And so there's a convenience aspect on that front. And that can also help the patient because we can actually program on your not so busy day at work to be doing the embryo transfer. Pardon me. Freeze-all cycles. I suppose the only hesitation I have is that those hormone replacement cycles that we put them back in mean you have to take hormones until the pregnancy establishes, which is around about 10 weeks of pregnancy. So you are taking more medication over a longer period of time. It probably doesn't do any harm. There is a suggestion out of Europe that those hormone replacement cycles are associated with a higher incidence of high blood pressure in late pregnancy. But we're waiting for some big studies to prove whether that's true or not. It's certainly not my impression from the Australian data. Freeze-alls, yep. If you have a freeze-all protocol that the clinic uses and they get good success, then that's great. It's certainly something that we've been able to do since we've modified the way in which we freeze eggs. A decade ago, using something called slow freezing, embryos that were frozen had half the chance of success compared with today. So with technology moving forward, it's certainly now an option.
And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website www.theivfjourney.com and select IVF Journey podcast from the navigation menu.